Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with 21 great conductors on indie labels. This was actually suggested by one of you, that we talk about some of the labels these conductors were on, but I thought I would broaden the reach a little bit because, you know, you folks are seeing these videos one at a time, and sometimes you see all of them, sometimes you don't. There is a conductors playlist, by the way. Conductors, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, it's called. And it has 30 some odd videos in it by now, including this whole series that we've been doing on the 20 greatest conductors, of which we've done about 100 and something of the 20 greatest conductors now. But this was a wonderful idea, but I thought rather than focusing on one label or doing a bazillion videos, I would do a survey of the major independent labels, the biggest ones, and the conductors who appear on them. 3 on each, which I had to pick, and I admit I had to pick them, but a lot of them have appeared on other lists. And so most of these are going to be new, fresh faces, because I really like to cover the territory. You know, I don't like to repeat unless it's absolutely necessary. And because, you know, the more names we get, the more opportunities there are for you to get to know these people and to listen to their work, which is part of the point behind all of this, of course. That's why we did the top 150, 20 best conductors. I mean, because otherwise, you know, the idea is to explore the range and breadth of the classical music universe. So there are lots more conductors on these labels that I did not mention, but a lot of them have been mentioned. Let me put it to you that way. So let's start. Chandos, the great British indie label that did all kinds of interesting and unusual stuff, and like so many labels, sort of has gotten close to exhausting the territory and has done a lot of remakes of stuff. But they do excellent work by and large, and they've had wonderful success with a whole range of conductors who none of us ever paid much attention to or heard of, starting with Bryden Thomson, who was their sort of house conductor for quite a long time. I mean, he did a Vaughan Williams cycle. He did terrific Martin New symphonies. Oh, my God. And he did Nielsen, and he did all kinds of other things, you know, with varying degrees of success, as all of these people do. They all record too much. Who are we kidding? And he did Elgar, and he did big, heavy, blowsy, slow Elgar symphonies that were kind of radical when we first heard them. But Bryden Thomson was a Chandos discovery. Alexander Gibson was one of their long-running conductors. He predated Chandos. You know, they had been recording him. They'd been recording him for RCA, and he made recordings for Decca. But he did gorgeous, fabulous Sibelius for them. Really wonderful. I mean, that's in some British music too, and other things like that. But the Sibelius was the big deal. Beautiful, beautiful Sibelius recordings. And Richard Hickox, whose best work, he was in the middle of a Vaughan Williams cycle when he passed away, but his best work was big choral stuff. I mean, he did a War Requiem that's probably better than Britain's own recording of the War Requiem. Elgar choral works, all kinds of Haydn masses. He did earlier music, but he was a fabulous conductor, really first rate of vocal music. His Britten operas were very good. He was a very talented guy. In plain symphonic music, he could be more hit and miss. But his choral recordings were really quite striking. Chandos is one of those labels, they don't generally do box sets. And it would be really nice if they did a few. I mean, they've done some. They've done like the Granger edition and the Walton complete works and things. But, you know, they haven't organized their catalog. One of you mentioned, and I agree completely, they should do backs. They really should do a big backs box. That would have been with Vernon Handley mostly, I guess. But the big backs box would have been fabulous. So who knows? Maybe they will in the future. So after Chandos, Bis. Oh, we talk about Bis all the time. Bis has discovered and worked with so many marvelous conductors who later jumped ship to the so-called major labels like Nimi Järvi, who was also on Chandos and who wound up on Deutsche Grammophon for a period, and Myung-Whun Chung, who also went to Deutsche Grammophon and whatnot. But here are 3 that I think are really pretty interesting and outstanding. First, Lan Shui with the Singapore Symphony. Made a whole series of recordings, some of them very, very striking. They don't get a lot of attention. I mean, like Scriabin and Debussy and other things. He did some fine, fine work there. And I think really worked well in raising the level of the orchestra, and they were beautiful sounding recordings. So Lan Shui deserves a shout out. Masaaki Suzuki, who I may have mentioned previously, I don't even remember. But I mean, for that Bach cycle, an extraordinary artist. Really first-class period instrument guy, and until Bis got a hold of him and started making these recordings, he didn't have much of an international reputation. I'm sure he had a local one, but I wasn't there, so I don't know. But a series of Bach recordings that are second to none in terms of their excellence, absolutely wonderful. And John Neschling, the Brazilian conductor. Oh, he's done so much fun stuff. Big, huge, fabulous orchestral works in Sao Paulo. We have Villa-Lobos. We have Respighi. We have all that fun stuff. Really, really enjoyable and very well recorded. A dynamic conductor who has a lot of character. They're just terrific recordings. So those are just three. There are many, many more. But we've talked about some of them, like Christian Lindberg and, Segerstam and stuff like that. These independent labels share conductors, particularly the British labels. I mean, there's the people who appear on Chandos also showed up on Hyperion, and we're going to get to that in a minute. And so they're all over the place, and you often cover more than one. I mean, there's a little incestuous stuff going on there, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine because different projects suit different labels. Harmonia Mundi, Nicholas McGegan. Yeah, Nicholas McGegan with a Philharmonia Baroque soloist. I mean, they have their own label now, but he started out doing like Handel operas and things like that. He's a very fine conductor all around, really is. And I mean, his Haydn has been pretty terrific for the most part, and his Baroque stuff is lovely. And yeah, so McGegan sort of fortified the earlier Harmonia Mundi catalog, and then went his own way. Phillipe Herreweghe. I mean, he's got also has like his own label, and he's appeared in other things, but his Harmonia Mundi stuff made his career. Gorgeous Bach cantatas, fabulous St. Matthew Passion, glorious Monteverdi Vespers. He did wonderful early music. Then he started trying to do Beethoven and stuff, and it all got less interesting. It really did. But he was and is a very, very fine artist, a sensitive artist who really uses period instruments to get some really lovely sounds out of them. Unlike most of these period instrument guys who think that the uglier the more it is, the more authentic it is. Herreweghe is not like that. So his recordings are lovely, but he's been remaking the same stuff over and over again for his own label or other label or whatever it was. And I stick to his Harmonia Mundi legacy. It's just easier. And it's just as good. So after Herreweghe, René Jacobs. Well, he was a countertenor with a really irritating voice, quite frankly. And then he started conducting. And his Mozart operas were thrillingly exciting. He did a bunch of Baroque operas that were very exciting. He's gone as far as like Haydn. And as a conductor, he's kind of out of his mind. He's a good opera accompanist because he's exciting and he's dramatic. In other things, he can be just bizarre. Bizarre like, Harnoncourt bizarre, Franz Bruggen bizarre. And so there's some strange things that he's done, but he's a force to be reckoned with on Harmonia Mundi. And then Hyperion. Now, Hyperion, as I said, they share some people with Chandos, and they but here are some really good ones. Martyn Brabbins. Martyn Brabbins is kind of like in the Vernon Handley interesting British repertoire, Adrian Bolt school of things. He does all kinds of interesting and unusual repertoire, and he usually does it very effectively, very, very well. And he's made lots of recordings for Hyperion, and they're oodles and oodles of fun. And let's see. Oh, Ilan Volkov. Volkov is he's an Israeli conductor who people tend not to think about too much, but he did some really terrific Stravinsky and, stuff like that. And also very, very unusual repertoire and things that you've never heard of. And he's exciting. He's a good conductor, a really solid conductor. And Howard Shelley, who's a pianist conductor. He can conduct from the keyboard. He did a bunch of things in the Romantic Piano Concerto series, but he also did all the Spohr symphonies. which is just thrilling. Now, he did the Spohr symphonies for Hyperion, and Howard Griffiths did them for CPO, and I get them confused all the time because the symphonies are equally boring, however you slice them, whoever's doing them. They sound kind of the same, but yeah, Howard Shelley is a fine artist. He also appeared on Chandos. He's appeared quite a few times. He did a Beethoven concerto cycle that was pretty good on Chandos, didn't he? Remember that, folks? I don't think my memory is playing me false. So, like I said, they're peripatetic, these conductors. They travel, but they're very, very fine, and you can explore them on these marvelous independent labels. CPO. Now, CPO had, as I said, Howard Griffiths, which is fine to do their Spohr thing. He was with the Orchestra della Svizzera Italiana, or one of those crowds. I've got them sitting right here. Wait a minute. Right? Okay. No, he did the Spohr symphonies with the NDR Radio Philharmonia. So, who knows? But he also did like Ferdinand Ries and all of those sort of, post-classical, immediate, not quite romantic people. That's kind of his specialty. And he's done them quite well. But CPO has had access to the German radio archives and a sort of more, less sort of British-oriented crowd. For example, Ari Rasilainen. Oh, is he a good, exciting, fun conductor? And he did the Atterberg symphonies, and he did Aulis Salonen, and all of these people you've never heard of, but who wrote absolutely splendid music. He is definitely worth looking into. It's a wonderful legacy. And that's the thing about these conductors, because you could do like an Amazon search under the name, and you could find their discographies. Or you could just do it on Google and find their discographies. They all have web pages with their discographies. And there's some really, really marvelously interesting music. And then, of course, Michail Jurowski. He is the dad of all the other Jurowskis, Vladimir Jurowski and those people. And he was a really, really good conductor. And he did quite a few things for CPO, including he specialized in Shostakovich, like film music. That was on Capriccio, actually. Capriccio had a lot of these people, too. But he did the Prokofiev ballets, a fabulous series of Prokofiev ballets on CPO. He specialized in Russian music, but he did it with wonderful conviction and musicality. He's a fine, fine artist. And his legacy, I hope, will someday appear in a lovely little commemorative box because he deserves the attention. Then Dacapo, the Danish label. Dacapo has Danish conductors who went on to do things for other labels as well. Michael Schønwandt and Thomas Dausgaard. I've got them all confused. Michael Schønwandt did a really fine Nielsen cycle, which was on Dacapo and on Naxos. They obviously specialize in Danish music and Danish composers who you've probably never heard of. But and Thomas Dausgaard, they did Asger Hammerich and Ruud Langyard and just these really interesting names that we've started to get to know over the past decades because they received first-class treatment by these dynamic Danish conductors. Now, Dausgaard did a complete Beethoven orchestral music cycle on CMAX, not on Dacapo, and made bunches of chamber music recordings of orchestral repertoires in period instrument style for Bis that were simply horrible. He drank the Kool-Aid, Dausgaard did. Why? I don't know. But if you stick to the Dacapo stuff, you'll get some really, really fine recordings of some extremely interesting music. And the other one I have to mention on Dacapo was Alan Gilbert, who did a Nielsen cycle with the New York Philharmonic on Dacapo because no one else would record the New York Philharmonic with Alan Gilbert, which was terrible. There was just, because the major orchestras priced themselves out of the market unless they had their own labels. And the New York Philharmonic had a streaming label where they did things. That's true. But the major labels were not going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars making recordings of basic repertoire stuff with conductors who were not hugely recognized names that no one was going to buy. I mean, you can't blame them. And the orchestras themselves, because of the union rules, were so expensive. And so they stopped making recordings in the United States, particularly. in Europe, where they had subventions and things like that, they were able to start their own labels. They did it in San Francisco. Chicago was able to do it. Some orchestras managed to put their own labels together with limited releases. But it really was one of the reasons the entire industry went down the crapper, was just the expense of doing these things, and because these conductors didn't have the kinds of, big popular personalities that could sell. I mean, the labels weren't interested in promoting them that way and selling them that way. And so Alan Gilbert's career with the New York Philharmonic was practically non-existent on disc, and it was solid. He's a solid conductor, a good conductor. He did a fabulous Mahler Ninth on Bis, of course, in Sweden. But he did do a superb Nielsen cycle with the New York Philharmonic, and Dacapo has always had affection for the New York Philharmonic because Leonard Bernstein came to Denmark and conducted Nielsen there, and sort of put Nielsen on the map. And he did various other Nielsen symphonies with the New York Philharmonic. So they documented that era in the New York Philharmonic's history, and thank God for them. Very, very interesting little nugget of discographic history. And then last but not least, we have to do Naxos, the largest classical label in the universe, the omnivore that devours everything. And the interesting thing about Naxos is that they consist equally of conductors that they discovered or that they promoted on their label, and conductors who they acquired from major labels who are still doing plenty of active work, like Leonard Slatkin was one of them. And another one was Gerard Schwarz, who had the Delos catalog of American music. And Delos, it was all actually owned, I think, by the orchestra, not by Delos. And Naxos acquired it all. So all of that fabulous American music that Schwarz did in Seattle left Delos. It migrated to Naxos, thank God, as part of their American music series. And then they allowed Schwarz to do a huge box, a retrospective of his work, which is absolutely sensational, with recordings from Nonsuch and Delos and Naxos original stuff. So it's a wonderful, wonderful legacy by a major artist that really would have been lost had it not been for Naxos. So Gerard Schwarz is on the list, even though we mentioned him before. But he's a wonderful example, along with Leonard Slatkin and some others, of where some of these artists wound up and were able to flourish and do absolutely sterling work on what was started life as a budget label, but simply became really the lifeblood of the classical recording industry. Also, David Lloyd-Jones, who does great British stuff. He's one of the British guys, and his Bach Symphony cycle is second to none. Absolutely wonderful. There are others, of course, too, like Andrew Penny, who did light music, and he did the Malcolm Arnold cycle. He's not on this list, but I just mentioned him, so there you go. And they're on Naxos, and very exciting for me is Jean-Luc Tingaud in Ireland, who's been doing some fabulous French music, extraordinarily wonderful French music, Dukas and Poulenc and, all of those guys. And he's been doing it extremely well. And I hope he continues. I hope there's more. So there you have it, my friends. 21 remarkable conductors who've done sterling work on independent labels. And of course, like I said, there are many others, some of whom you may want to mention, which is perfectly fine. But let's try and use names that we haven't been talking about before, because the survey has outgrown its original usefulness and hopefully has taken on a wider utility and significance for all of you music lovers out there. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.